a different programme for you this morning than we usually do, because you're about to hear an incredibly powerful and incredibly poignant interview, which we're going to give the space to play out today probably over the next half hour or so. Victims who suffered at the notorious Kincora boys' home in Belfast have made a legal challenge against the government's refusal to include them in its inquiry into child sex abuse. Now, one of those victims supporting the legal action is Richard Kerr. Richard's 53. He lives in Dallas in Texas, and he was abused in Kincora and has waived his right to anonymity to speak to the Nolan Show about what happened to him. It's very, very important stuff, this. Richard was placed in care from the age of 5, initially at Williamson House. I began by asking him what he remembered about that time.
I was removed from my family in 1966, I believe, sometime in December. And we were taken to Williamson House, me and my sister.
What are your memories of your first day getting in there?
My first evening, because we arrived there in the evening, I remember having bangers and beans. And that was the first meal that was given to us by Miss Courtney, was the lady in charge of the side of Williamson House that I was in.
And
I felt confused, and I remember saying to my sister, "Where is my mother?" And so we went on, and then they put us to bed. And then the next day, I believe we ended up in a courtroom and told us that we would be put into care till the age of 18.
And little did you know, Richard, what was to happen, because the abuse before Kincora, which we'll talk about later, the abuse started in Williamson House, didn't it?
Yeah, it started in Williamson House, yes.
What happened? You were 8 years of age, weren't you?
Yes, at first, at 8 years of age, I was in the playing room where a gentleman would come in and they start wrestling with me in the playroom. It's like children's playroom, and I would be lifted up into the air, and over this person's back. And while he was doing that, he was playing around with my private parts. And it got more serious later on, and I believe it was around when I was about 11. And when I was in my room, the boys' rooms were on the ground floor. I mean, the top ground floor. The girls' rooms were on the top level floor. And there was a doorway divided the home into two parts, one for the Catholics and one for the Protestants. So this person came through the hallway at night, and my bedroom was closer to the doorway, and he would come into my room and get into the bed with me. I had a teddy bear, and I believe it was some kind of gollywog. I remember it at the time because it was black, and it had things coming out of the around the head area. He just got into my bed, and he just started playing around with me, and I remember biting hard on the teddy bear. And then he would get out of the bed, and I was feeling so afraid. I actually froze for about 2 hours. I was in fear. I couldn't move. So that was the memory of that first time.
And you were 11 years of age. You knew it was wrong. Presumably you're so young that you know it's wrong, but you're confused. Is that fair?
Yeah, I felt, yes, that would be, yes.
And then you're moved to the notorious Kincora boys' home in Belfast, Richard.
Yes, yes.
You're a teenager now.
Yes.
How long after you arrived there did the abuse start?
Well, when I arrived in Kincora, Joseph Maint and his boss came to Williamson House, and they had a meeting because I was getting angry because I remember trying to tell one of the staff about the abuse in Williamson House, and she and she said that she would look into it, and they never did. And she was removed, and I just remember them coming up, having a meeting, and in the following 2 days, my sister was removed from Williamson House. And then I was removed and went with Joseph Maine and his boss up to Kincora. And I remember when I arrived in Kincora, remember arriving in Kincora, there was only 3 boys there at the time when I arrived. And I felt okay when I arrived the first day in Kincora, because I felt I was getting away from my abusers back in Williamson House. So it gave me some kind of relief that I was getting away from Hell House 1, if you don't mind me saying that, okay?
Yeah.
But I didn't realize that I was going to Hell House 2. It was only when Joseph Maines, after a week or two, when Joseph Maine invited me to his office and said that he liked me, and that then he invited me to his bedroom, and then he offered me some whiskey, and I think he also had cherry there, some sweet cherry.
How old are you now as a child when this happened?
In Kincora?
Yeah.
14.
Okay.
Now remember, when I arrived there was only 3 other boys.
And of course, Richard, at 14...
I had my own room.
And Richard, at 14 years of age, your body is developing. You privacy is important. You're confused, and the last thing that you want is for this abuse to continue, because it's such a formative age, isn't it? 14 years of age. You're a child, but you're starting to get your independence. As I say, you're aware of sex, you're aware of sexual development, but an adult abusing you. My goodness. Horrible. And it started in Kincora all over again.
Well, I was very confused about that when I got to Kincora because of what happened in Williamson House. And, it was, I was dealing with some flashbacks from it then. But at the time, I felt, here's a man who's taking me away from Hell House 1. And that's how my journey, that's how I felt like when I got to Kincora. But then, a week or two later, it began again when Joseph Maines invited me to his office. And then he invited me to his room. And this was done in the evening, usually around about 7 o'clock. Because we had afternoon tea. I remember having afternoon tea at 4:30. And then there's a TV room. There was 3 other boys, but one of them had left the house, and the other 2 were there in the TV room. And then around about 7 o'clock, I was invited into his office. And then he took me back to his bedroom, and he said he liked me. And then he gave me some whiskey, and he asked me to put cream on his back. And then he put cream on mine. And then we had a sexual encounter then. And then he told me to get up and get washed. He had a shower in that place. It was downstairs in his room. And after that, I was told to go back to the TV room. And then it started to happen kind of on a regular basis.
What would he say, Richard, after sex? Would he apologize? Would he scare you into not telling people?
No, he was not that way at first. He wasn't that way at first. Remember, he was taking more drinks. I was taking more drinks. And he already knew, because he was a friend of Eric, who was in Williamson House. So they were communicating back and forward. So he would say things like, Richard, I'm really going to be good to you. I'm going to be nice to you. I'll take care of you. He said a word like, you are a special person. And he kept reassuring me. He was very, very manipulating as I look back.
And this was the warden. This was one of the men that was supposed to be protecting you.
In charge, yes. In charge, yes. He had a lot of control over Mr. Semple and Mr. McGrath.
Semple was his assistant. McGrath was the house father of Kincora, William McGrath. All these three are dead now.
Yes, and Mr. McGrath never lived in Kincora. Mr. McGrath just lived down the street from Kincora.
McGrath was always considered the ringleader, wasn't he?
Yeah, well...
He was manipulative in how he controlled the paedophile ring in Kincora.
Well, Stephen, let me tell you, they fabricated, they did, Mr. McGrath, because they wanted to have it all focus on Mr. McGrath. He was impulsive, yes. But what the newspapers and the books are saying, it's not the truth about it. It's just not the truth. Mr. Semple never abused me. And I never saw Mr. Semple abuse any of the boys in Kincora. If he had, it had to be where Mr. Semple would have to take them out of Kincora, either to a football match. Usually that's the way it was. And Mr. McGrath would be impulsive. You wouldn't know when he's going to do it. He tried it with me in the bathtub. And he tried it a few times with me in the television room.
How did he get access to you when you're in the bath? Were you not able to keep him away, shut the door?
Well, he used to be a her. This is the way he worked. He would come and cut people's hair. Okay?
Yeah.
So in the dining room area, that's where you go in. He would close the door and say, "Next, please." He was a hair cutter. So he closed the door behind him, cutting people's hair. And sometimes he would use that little bathroom downstairs because there was a mirror in there where he could close the door and have somebody. He had a reason. I'm going to cut your hair. So he could separate you from the others.
Were you aware that other boys were being abused too, Richard?
Okay, there were other boys being abused, but there were boys, the boys were being inside, and there were boys picked to go on the outside.
Did you talk about it among yourselves?
I talked to Stephen about it and Billy about it, but we were the three boys that were told that we would be going out of Kincora. The other boys was to stay in Kincora. Those who stayed in Kincora had more of the relationships with McGrath. The ones on the outside had more relationships with Joseph Maines.
And how did they control you, this paedophile ring? Did they bully you? Did they beat you? Did they control you by fear? How did they actually control what they were doing?
Well, they controlled by, with me, I can speak from my experience, they controlled me by reassuring me that they were there to take care of me. That was the number one thing. They would have me go to hotels and then give me alcohol, and they manipulated you with kind words about yourself. I had a low self-esteem. My journey up to then, I was totally damaged, and I became an object to them, and it was more about pleasing them. And Joseph Maines took me under his wing.
Did he ever threaten you that if you spoke out, what would happen?
Well, we're going to get into another area here. There were times that he got angry with me when things got out of control. I'll give you an example. I was in Lauren with two men in a hotel. All right. Found I was drinking pretty heavy when I believe I started stealing from them. Not from them, from a room in the hotel. And then somebody reported me to the police. And then the police found me at the harbor. And then they brought me to the police station. And they asked me, where do you come from? I said, well, I come from, I'm staying at Kincora. They called Joseph Maines up. And Joseph Maines told the police to bring me back to Kincora. And then I got back to Kincora. Mr. Maines wasn't very happy with me. He asked me to go to my room. And he said he'll talk to me tomorrow. And he brought me into his office the next day. And he sat down and talked to me. And he says, I don't like the fact that you are stealing money. And he just showed anger towards me.
This is a sex offender showing anger towards you for stealing.
Yeah, because that opened up something with the police in Lauren. I think they wanted to know why I was in a room with two men, and they wanted to go and look at it.
And had the police asked? So the police had a record that you'd told them that you were in a bedroom with two adult men?
Yes, they do have that.
And how old were you at the time?
15.
And what did that would have been the RUC at the time, Royal Ulster Constabulary. What did they do with that knowledge?
I don't know. They didn't do anything with the knowledge, but it is in the papers.
And that's...
It is the newspapers got a hold of it. I don't know why.
Did you give descriptions of these men?
Yes, I did.
Did you know who the men were?
Yes, I did.
You knew their names?
Yes.
And these men had sex with you, Richard?
Yes, many others.
And the police knew about it and did nothing?
The police knew about what happened at the hotel because people complained, and no word of them where they were located again. All was done was that I was brought back to Kincora. Mr. Maines told me to go to my room. He wasn't very happy. And he said, I'll speak to you tomorrow in the office. He said, I don't like the fact that you stole.
My goodness. You said that there were many men. So were you often brought to hotels?
Yes, I was, I remember being brought to the Park Avenue Hotel.
Which is right in the heart of
still
Belfast.
The same way as when my last visit there, I went up there with someone and took photographs, and they really hadn't changed anything. Me and Stephen and Billy were put back in the corner of that room there where the black leather chairs and the red carpet. And when I got there, I remembered that we never went through the front door. We actually went through the back door, because if you look at the Park Avenue Hotel, there's two entrances to come in. So we come in there in the back way at night, and you couldn't know anybody going in or out.
And when you're in the bedroom, as a 15-year-old child, and these adult men walk in, what do they say to you?
They never talked a lot. That was the point. We never walked together all the time up the staircase. One would go into the elevator, and I would go up the stairs. That's the way it was. And sometimes they were already up in their room.
And there would be more than one man in the room with you at a time?
Well, the first time at the Park Avenue Hotel, a few times at the Park Avenue Hotel, there was only one person. So I would go up there. I was given the room number, knock on the door. They would ask me to come in. And then they were kind. They were nice. They, lay on the bed. Let me do this to you. They would even remove my clothes. They got thrill of removing your clothing. But remember, I was under the influence of alcohol at the time.
No, I know.
And I needed the alcohol to deal with it.
I know.
But the real thing started to happen when they got me, when Joseph Maines Well, when things came crumbling down, when Joseph Baines got me to go a job at the Europa Hotel as a bellboy, and he went and brought me down, and we spoke to Harper Brown in his office. And he told Harper Brown, I'd like him to have a little job here. You got to remember, I was 14. I leave in the morning at 8:30. I come back at 3:45. Okay? I had more time in Kincora. Okay? I was the youngest, so I saw more. Most of the boys were working boys. They would leave early in the morning at 7, and then they would come back at 7 at night. So when I was still in school at the time. So when I came 16, he got me a job as a bellboy at the Europa Hotel.
Did the abuse continue there?
Oh, yes, because I had the keys, the pass key. The people would come into the whip and saddle bar, and then they knew that who to go to. And when one of them would say they'd left their key out, so I would go up to the 7th floor or something, go to the room. I would go in and I would have a sexual encounter, and they would pay me things. They did pay me money there.
And meanwhile, you're hurting inside. This is destroying you inside, Richard.
Well, I was hurting since the beginning of Winston House. It just increased. It progressed.
Can you tell me what the pain feels like? The psychological pain of being abused constantly?
Well, you feel like your soul is being destroyed. And I was in constant fear. And sometimes you feel like you're being hypnotized, like this is not real. And sometimes I'd feel like I've got to get out of this reality. I had constant fear at night. I couldn't sleep. I'd sweat. I would be sweating at night. I couldn't bear the light being out. It was getting to that point. And then I would have to sleep with my clothes on. I struggled with that for years. I had to have double wearing underneath, even in hot weather.
You had to have double what?
Double clothing underneath. People didn't understand that. So I could protect myself. I never felt safe. But this whole thing didn't lead into... It led into more things. More disgusting acts, what they wanted me to do. I don't need to get into those. I'm sorry, but...
No, I don't want you to get into those. I don't want you to get into that. I don't want you.
And then my friend Stephen was part of this.
And you've mentioned Stephen a few times, and I know that Stephen, who was also abused, this is Stephen Warren you're talking about, he killed himself, took his own life.
The boys that were working on the outside all killed themselves, except for me. I did make an attempt. The boys who were working in the inside, who were abused by McGrath, were a little older. So, the time when it came for the investigation to happen. See, the story is this, Stephen. They wanted to confine it to the home, but they used only the boys to testify, the ones who were confined to the home. The other boys who were not confined to the home were either removed or either committed suicide, or in my case, they got rid of me to go to England.
Stephen,
and then they would intimidate those boys because some of those boys were married.
Stephen Warren jumped to his death.
And they were given immunity. But they were putting the words into they were putting the words into them to tell them what to say. Focus it on McGrath. As long as we keep focusing it on McGrath, it could just stay at Kincora. They fabricated the story. You've been all reading all this stuff in the newspapers for years. They want you to focus it actually at Kincora. And that is not what the story's about.
You said that you were taken to England.
Yes, I remember taking to England. I have evidence of that. I have a photograph of me with other people, 1977, February the 26th. There's a date, registration, that fits the photograph of the date and time. I would have only been 15. My birthday's on May the 12th. And I'm supposed to be going to school. How I got there, I don't remember. But the photograph doesn't lie.
There's also a record in the visitors' book for the Elm Guest House, the infamous Elm Guest House, which says
yes.
BBC
Five
Belfast.
Richards. Did you look at that? 5 Richards. One in Paddington. I lived in Paddington.
It says,
the other one was in Greenwich. I lived there with a man in Greenwich.
It says in this entry, Belfast NI Richard. That was you.
Yeah, Belfast, Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
And those are the list of boys, and the third line is what they do.
And you say you had to live with a man?
I was living with a man, yes. In Manchester, Liverpool, and Preston, Lancashire. I was living with a man. I was brought to a house in outside Manchester where they would, there was other boys there, and they were taking photographs of us. And they said that, you look good, we can make money from this, and we'll send these and put this in the boys' magazine, and then we'll send them off to Amsterdam.
And they got you to do that by getting you drunk, or what?
Well, not at first. They were giving me drinks, but not. They kind of, what they try to do is that they try to build you up.
But explain to me, Richard, when you go to one of these houses in England,
mm-hmm.
how they coerce you, how they force you to pose naked for them. How do they do that?
Well, you're in a situation you have nowhere else to go. You're brought and you're trained. I came from a home as a child, so all I ever knew, the kind of people that took care of me, was abusers. I didn't know any better.
And when you're in England, you're 14 or 15?
When I was 14, you mean when I was in Kincora?
When you're in England, when you're in Elm House and Manchester and Dolphin Square, Eccleston Square, you were in too in London.
I was in many places. I was even in the Rembrandt. I haven't mentioned that yet. The Rembrandt. It's a place in Manchester. It's like a bar guest house. The rooms are on the top floor, and the bar's down below. I even lived in Rochdale. I even lived in Bacup.